that you have been having a good fall. I don't know if you've had the experience I've had, which is like once it turns September 1st, it's all of a sudden Thanksgiving and then Christmas. That's the experience I've been having, is that it's been going pretty quickly. But I've had a lot of cool things that I've gotten to be a part of this fall, and I hope you have had some of those kind of moments too. But I wanted to tell you about a few of them as we get into what we're going to be talking about today. I was reflecting kind of on these last few months and what it's been like in my life, and there were some specific things that stuck out to me. One was that in the last few months, I've gotten a chance 2 different times to go to concerts. Now, that's not overly remarkable, except that we spent, a few years there where stuff like that just didn't happen. So I think maybe I appreciate it more than I used to. But I also love live music. Chris and I love to see concerts together. So 2 different times this fall, once here in Knoxville and once out of town, we got a chance to see some bands that we loved, hear music from years gone by that we love. And what a cool experience, right? You're standing there with hundreds or thousands of people, and everybody is laughing and smiling and singing and dancing at all skill levels. It's, a wide range of people. And there was one of the concerts I was, I kind of turned and looked at Chris and said something. I noticed over my right shoulder, there was a lady, she is just like dancing full on in the aisle next to me. And she kind of reaches out to me like, we're going to do this together. I was like, all right, whatever. But it's just, we're having this communal experience of experiencing this music together. It's a powerful moment, and you can really get lost in that and enjoy that moment. Then not too long after that, I got a chance to go with my son, who is 12. He and I got to go to watch UT beat Florida in Neyland Stadium at night. Many of you were there. It was a great night. It was his first he's been to UT games. It was his first big game like that. What a cool moment, right? And the whole stadium is sort of in it together. It's third down, we're on defense, and we're like, we are a part of this. We are gonna do our job, right? And just the noise level. And then, we'd groan together at the penalties, and we'd cheer at the touchdowns, and the fireworks are going off, and Rocky Top, and it's just an amazing night. And everybody's just having this moment together. And then, not too long after that, I got a chance to go to this outdoor thing and see this incredible fireworks display. And we're watching these projections, and there's music and fireworks, and thousands of people. Everybody's looking in the same direction, eyes up. Everybody's kind of reacting at the same time and having this communal moment of just enjoyment. People are just having a good time. And then just a few weeks ago, we gathered in my parents' neighborhood with my whole family and my kids for Halloween. And I liked Halloween as a kid. I always loved dressing up, and you get a lot of candy. I think maybe I enjoy it even more as a parent, just getting to watch all of that. And this neighborhood is really special, and people in that neighborhood go all out. They decorate, they have special snacks and treats. Of course, they're giving out candy. And we get on the hayride, and we do the whole thing, and you're walking around and you're waving at people. Some people you only see once a year when you're doing this exact thing. Other people you know and haven't seen in a while. And then just complete strangers who are like, oh, I love your costume, or they're saying something to your kids. And it just struck me that night how far out of their way people had gone, strangers, to make sure that kids like mine and other kids just had a fun night. Just for the pure enjoyment. There is no other reason people did that. It's just because it was fun. And we had this experience together. I have the same feeling when does any of y'all do outdoor Christmas lights? I know some of y'all do. Thank you for that. There's some of us, we have some, but we're just not in a phase of life where we have a ton of time for that. And when we drive around with our kids to look at your Christmas lights, I just think how nice it is. You guys are mostly inside, and you don't necessarily get to enjoy your own. You do that for the enjoyment of other people, so that people can have an experience together. And it's special to get to have all this stuff going on, have these communal experiences. So we've had some of these really special, cool moments this fall. But I've also told you that right as school was starting and just thereafter, Chris and I both lost our grandmothers. Both of our grandmothers went to heaven within about 4 weeks of each other. And so we spent a lot of the beginning of the fall being with our families and going to funerals and just going through that whole process in amongst all these other things that were happening. And similarly, though it was times of grief and sadness, we're having this communal experience. In both cases, we gathered in the sanctuaries of the churches that both of our grandmothers attended, packed out house of people who love them, who love us, and we're telling stories, and we're interacting with each other, and people are just loving us and being there for us. And at each of these instances that I just described to you, there were hundreds of people around me. there for a shared purpose, there for a similar reason to support each other or to enjoy something. And naturally, if there were hundreds of people with me at each of these events, statistically speaking, there were a lot of different viewpoints represented in each of those groups. There were people around me at each of those events who voted Democrat, who voted Republican, and who didn't vote. At every single one of those things I just described, those groups were represented. There were gay people and straight people. There were single people, married people, people dating, people divorced. There were young people and there were old people. There were people who were college educated and beyond, and some who didn't finish high school. All of those things are true, but if I'm honest, I didn't notice any of that stuff at any one of those gatherings I just named to you. At the concert, nobody tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, what denomination are you? Like, what church do you go to? I just wanted to check before I sang along next to you, just wanted to know. Nobody asked me that. At the ball game, I didn't ask anybody who they voted for before I high-fived them. Didn't come up. Because we were doing a shared thing together. At the funeral, nobody came up to me and said, I loved your Grams, but I really wish I could have convinced her to believe the same thing that I believe about X, Y, and Z issue. It didn't come up. Nobody asked that. And because a lot of times in life's purest moments, in the moments where we are happiest or saddest, what's so beautiful about those moments is that we're just standing together on common ground. Whether we even realize it or not, we find joy and we find comfort in those moments because we're just like being human together. We're sharing the highs and lows of life. We're focused on those times, on what unites us, on the very, very many things that unite us. And that's what we spent this whole series talking about. The series is called Common Ground. We spent 3 weeks talking about our common ground, and we're going to close that out today. We've talked about loving God. We've talked about loving people. We've talked about sharing hope. And these are places where we can find common ground together. And I want to remind you, in no way are we saying in this series or at any other time that we should ignore our differences. No, differences are so good. Difference and variety and the uniqueness that is each one of you, this is from God. This is amazing. We should respect our differences. We should celebrate them. And the things that we believe do matter. Because we're not saying, every perspective is right, or every behavior is right, or every idea is Christ-like. Well, that's not true. We know that. But what we are saying is that we can get into trouble, especially as Christians, when we start to focus on difference in such a way that it causes us to draw circles. And we say, if you think or be or whatever that, you're over in that circle and I'm in this circle. And only the people in this circle are in and those people are out. That's where we can get into trouble with our differences, is when we start to diminish the image of God in somebody else because they don't look just like us or they don't act just like us. There's a tactic that's been taken for probably as long as there have been people, that you dehumanize the person that you disagree with to the point where you don't feel bad anymore for treating them badly. If you can convince yourself or somebody else that person is not worthy, that they're not really human, they're not really a child of God, and you diminish that image of God in them so much, it's very easy to be mean to them. It's very easy to let yourself off the hook when you do something bad or when you hurt someone or neglect someone. And it's so important, as we're talking about common ground, to remember what is common between every human being on this earth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look into a passage in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 17. So if you got your Bible, you can go there. It's going to be on the screen. When my niece was about 5 or 6, she's 15 now, but she was about 5 or 6 at the time, and she had been at church, and I saw her that evening, and so I was asking her about her day. What'd you learn at church today? And she was so excited. She was like, I learned a new story at church today. I'm like, hit me, let's hear it. She said, we studied this passage about Jesus with these leopards. Now, she's an animal lover, so she was like totally excited about this. And like, I wouldn't say I'm a Bible expert, but like I've been to seminary, I know my way around the Bible, never heard of this passage, but I'm like, okay, tell me more. What happened? She was like, well, there's 10 leopards and Jesus healed every single one of them, but only one came back to say thank you. And I'm like, leprosy, got it. I figure it out. But you know what? She says, only one of those leopards came back to say thank you. And that's what we should do. And I thought, you know what? She's got the gist of it. I'm going to let that one go. I think that's fine. No harm, no foul. She understood the purpose of this story. So we're going to read a different version of it today, the one that's actually in the Bible. But you know what? God can work in a lot of ways. So God bless our Cokesbury Kids leaders who try to get this information across to our children, and we thank them for it. We're going to read from Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 men with skin diseases approached him. Keeping their distance from him, they raised their voices and said, "Jesus, Master, show us mercy." When Jesus saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." As they left, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he had been healed, returned and praised God with a loud voice. He fell on his face at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus replied, "Weren't 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Nobody returned to praise God except this foreigner." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up and go. Your faith has healed you." Now, there's a lot to get into here. We're going to do our best with the time we have, but there's something that is jumping off the page that we've got to talk about. So Jesus is traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee, and there's this group of 10 men with leprosy, this skin disease, and they're in agony, and they are certainly outcasts from society at this point. It's a contagious disease, so they're not supposed to be around people. They're in agony. They cry out to Jesus. Jesus heals them, and only one comes back to thank Jesus. And we'll get to that in a minute, but did you notice which one came back to say thank you? The one that came back was a Samaritan. Now, in more than one New Testament story, we see a Samaritan being the hero, the one, or at least the one to be emulated, the one that's being lifted up as doing the right thing. Another one you might have heard of, it's in the title, the Good Samaritan. That's another case where Jesus is telling this story, and a Samaritan is the one that we're supposed to look at as somebody that we want to connect with about our own behavior. Now, that's not going to impact us in Knoxville, Tennessee in the same way that it would have the original listeners, because Jews and Samaritans, they did not get along. Talk about drawing a circle. Jews over here, Samaritans over here, these are not groups that are mixing. And certainly the Jewish people would have seen the Samaritan people as you guys are out and we're in. So they did not get along. They wouldn't have been socializing. So it would have been jarring for a Jewish listener to have heard Jesus lifting up this Samaritan. If you want to put it in today's terms, one example could be like if a Ukrainian audience is listening to Jesus, and the example Jesus gives is this Russian guy who does the thing that they all need to do. And it'd be like, whoa. And that's one example of just, neighbors who don't get along. Could be if it was right here talking to me, maybe Jesus is telling the story to a bunch of Vol fans, and it's like the Bama fan or the Gator fan who does the right thing. We're like, what? That couldn't be. It would be jarring, right? It would be not what you're expecting. And Jesus often did this. He's shaking things up. He's making you look at something differently. He's asking you to take a different perspective. But there's something else here too. What we know from the story, we don't get a ton of details, but what we can tell is there was a Samaritan in this group, at least one, right? Because the guy that came back was a Samaritan. And the other folks, most of them, if not all of them, were Jewish. So that means the Samaritan and the Jewish lepers were in the same group living together. There's a New Testament scholar, William Barclay. He said this about this passage. He said, in the common tragedy of their leprosy, they had forgotten that they were Jews and Samaritan, and they remembered only that they were people in need. Let that soak in for a second. Their great need and their shared suffering were more pressing than the differences in their lives. You have seen this in your life too. I know that you have. If you have ever found yourself or someone that you love in need of emergency medical care, and you take them to a hospital, or God forbid you have to call 911, when that doctor or nurse or paramedic arrives, have you ever one time stopped and asked that caregiver about their allegiance to any particular political party or religious affiliation or anything like that? Has that ever come up? No, of course not. Because in times when something's difficult, there are things that strip away those differences about us, that get down to the core of who we are and what we need. In difficult times in your life, do you remember people coming together to help you? You may have either known people impacted or just seen it on the news. The flooding that happened recently in northeastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, communities devastated, so many lives lost. And what you saw was neighbors dropping everything they were doing to show up for people in need. They didn't say, hey, now who is this flood bucket going to go to? I want to make sure it's the right kind of person before I help them. Who's going to use these cleaning supplies or this water? I just want to make sure. No, nobody did that. They said, who is in need and what can we do? I saw it from this church. I saw it out in our community. Because in times of great need, people just show up. Do you remember the snowstorm we had at the beginning of 2024? I know it's hard to believe that was even this year, but that was this year. That's how we kicked off this year. We had tons of snow. Our whole city shut down there for about a week. And as Carter was telling you earlier, we were a part of a warming center program for the city of Knoxville and Knox County. And we had a whole plan for what we would do if we needed to open. And then, of course, it snowed a bunch and everything. All our plans went out the window because nobody could get anywhere. But what we found was people who could get here just showed up. It didn't matter. Some of them were you, but some went to other churches. Some didn't go to church at all. They said, we just thought maybe you could use some help. People sent food and money and donations of all kinds because they just didn't ask questions. They saw that somebody was in need. And that all happened for the same reason the lepers are in a group together. It's because at our most basic level, humans need the love and grace of God, and humans need each other. Our human needs are our common ground. Every person on this earth needs food, we need water, we need shelter, and we need community if we're going to survive and thrive. All of us need that. We love to think we're so different. But every person on this earth wants to care for their family. They want to provide for themselves. They want to provide for the people they love. They want to have a place to live and work, a place to call home. They want to be healthy and they want to be safe. Now, we go about that in a lot of different ways. And this is sometimes where greed or sin creeps in and people start doing the wrong thing. But at our most basic level, we all have the same needs. Every person on this earth is in need of the love and the grace of God. Every person on this earth, me, you, everybody outside the walls of this church is in need of the love and grace of God. Every single one of us needs an encounter with God. The way that man with leprosy had an encounter with God, every one of us needs the grace of a fresh start. We need the hope of forgiveness. We need the peace of God's love. But it's so easy to get off course, to convince ourselves that somehow we're better than the people around us, that we have some kind of like moral high ground or that we're right. Friends, we have sacrificed so much on the altar of worshiping being right. We have pledged our allegiance to winning instead of sharing. We have given our lives and our money and our hearts and our priorities to looking out for number one, instead of looking in the mirror and remembering that we're all sinners in need of grace. I know it is hard to admit sometimes, it's hard for me to admit sometimes, that I am in just as much need of the love and grace of God as my greatest enemy, as the person I disagree with the most, the person I cannot understand. Our need for God, our need for connection, our need for love, this stuff, y'all, is stronger than any of the things that divide us. So when we think about our common ground, we've got to acknowledge that we're all equally in need of God's grace. So once we do that, once we establish that our common ground is the fact that every single person on this planet is a sinner in need of grace, then we can move on to some other common ground. And we've talked these first 3 weeks about the core values of this faith community, that we're going to love God, we're going to love people, and we're going to share hope. And everything we do is about those three things. That's our accountability. That's our litmus test for what we should do and shouldn't do. It's those three things. But the catalyst for all of that, the thing that's pushing us forward, the soil that can grow in, is the common ground of gratitude. That's the package all this can come in, is that our next step as individual Christians, as a church family, is to give thanks. This is a rhetorical question, so you have to raise your hand for this one, but can anybody here say, like, I'm so happy with the way things are going in the world? I just feel like it's going great. Like, I wouldn't change a thing. I have not come across anybody who thinks that. Regardless of how they voted, regardless of what country people live in, I've not heard a lot of people say, like, I think we're nailing this. I think it's pretty good. So if we're not okay with the state of things, and describe that however you want, if we're not okay with the state of things, if we think something could be better, then we've got to ask ourselves honestly, like, okay, then what? What do we do next? If at our core, we know that we're all children of God, that we're all loved by God, everyone is able to be redeemed by God, then what do we do next? What is our next step on this topic? I think we've got a clue right here in our passage today. I think we begin to find common ground through practicing gratitude. We see it in the passage. There's only one guy that takes the time to thank Jesus. We all probably can admit we can be pretty decent at begging God for things. If you've been in a moment of desperation or need in your life, I know I've been there, of like really asking God, begging God for something. We can be pretty good at that. But if we're honest, how are we doing on the gratitude piece of it? And I don't say this at all to make us feel guilty, but I say it so we can kind of look around at ourselves and each other and say, let's have some accountability here. How are we doing on the gratitude piece? Are we thanking God? That's a practical next step for us, that we can practice this gratitude piece. That when I think about my relationship with God or being a Christian, I often think about it, the easy way for me to think about it is like as a cross. So you can think about it like you see the symbol of the cross all around a church, that one part of being a Christian is this sort of vertical relationship, right? It's the relationship between you and God. Because being a Christian starts with a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So you've got that personal connection. So I need to practice staying connected to God by saying thank you, by thanking God for all the good things in my life. This is something that we can do today. You can do it right now. You can do it all week, but we need to be practicing that throughout our lives. That's a next step for us because it keeps us grounded. It keeps us centered in this relationship with God where we say, God, thank you for. And some days the only thing you're going to come up with is, thank you for my life, God. Thank you that I woke up today. That may be all you can think of. That's okay. Other days you're going to be able to fill out a whole list. But you have that connection with God, and that's a vertical part of our faith. I'll give you an example for this week. They're coming up on Thanksgiving. Some of you are going to be traveling between a lot of family gatherings. Does anybody have that kind of schedule coming? You could go the route of complaining about how tired you are and how much there's going on and oh my gosh, how are we going to get it all done? Or if we're going to practice gratitude in our relationship with God, we could say, God, thank you that I have people in my life. Thank you that I have friends to spend this holiday with, or thank you that I have family to visit. That's an example of how we could practice this connection between me and God. But if we want to take it further and we want to find common ground and we want to find a way to help healing in our community, to spread the love of God, then we don't let our faith stop in the vertical part. We've got to take our faith to the horizontal part. Jesus talked about this. He said, the marching orders are love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. That's the vertical connection between you and God. And then he said, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the horizontal part. That means that anything we have going in our personal relationship with God, the way we make it real, the way we make it work is we go outward with it. We start to make it impact the people around us. We take it horizontal. So we start to love our neighbors. And if we're going to practice gratitude in our relationship with God, then we want to take it out. We got to practice gratitude with each other. There's this guy and he goes back to say thank you. And that's what we want to do with God in our lives. But then we can turn around and do that to other people. I'm practically, literally saying that we need to practice being grateful to the people around us. This is a spiritual discipline in our lives. This is a next step for us. God willing, my husband Chris and I next month will celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. It's an incredible gift and blessing in my life, and I thank God for it every day. And one of the things that I would point to as why we are still married 20 years in is that one of the disciplines of our relationship is that we practice gratitude with each other. And we're trying to instill that in our kids too, but we certainly work on this with each other. Y'all, we thank each other for things all the time. Thank you for doing the dishes. Thanks for grabbing that stuff at the store. Thanks for making sure that we got the kids on time. Thank you for getting that gift that we needed for that birthday that's come. There's a million things. The minutia of life, we're not thanking each other for that because somebody like went above and beyond. This is just like the regular stuff. You're just a grown up and you just got to do it, right? Like somebody's got to do the laundry. Somebody's got to do the dishes. Somebody's got to get milk. It has to be done. But what we have found in our marriage is that it keeps us on common ground with each other if we take the time to practice being thankful to each other. Thank you for getting the grass mowed. Thank you for taking out the trash. Y'all, this is daily, boring, lame stuff. But because we practice gratitude, we feel seen and appreciated. We feel noticed. We don't feel taken for granted. And that has created a common ground in our marriage. But that takes practice. That is a discipline that we have to practice in our life. But I want to ask you, how could you find common ground this week with friends and family you're going to interact with over the holidays? How could you practice that? Instead of pointing out where you differ, let's take an easy one. Whipped potatoes versus mashed. Mashed only and forever, but I respect your opinions. Instead of debating the merits of those potatoes at Thanksgiving, what if we're just like, hey, thank you for doing that. Thanks for bringing something. Thanks for cooking. Thanks for hosting. Thanks for coming. I don't know if you've ever been the out-of-town family member who travels in. I don't know if you've ever been hit with this line when you walk through the door with your children who you've wrestled into the car and brought a long distance to a gathering, and somebody says, nice of you to join us, it's been a while. How does that feel? Not great. The difference between that and walking through the door and somebody saying, thank you so much for coming, it's so great to see you. There is a world of difference between those sentences, and they both took about the same amount of words. But it takes actual effort for us to do that. For us to live from a place where the gratitude we have to God starts to spill out to other people. This sounds so simple and so basic, but y'all, it is life-changing if we would do this. And frankly, if we all did this, we wouldn't be talking about it anyway, but we know we don't. We know that our default setting is not usually to thank people for doing the things that we think they already should be doing or we think are no big deal. This also works with strangers. I've heard people say, I probably even thought in my own life, like, why do I need to thank a service worker? They're getting paid to do this. Yeah, but doesn't it make a difference when you get thanked, even if you're supposed to do something or you're already getting paid to do it? What if you look the person in the eye who hands you that coffee out the drive-through window or bags up your groceries or helps you in whatever setting you find yourself in the next week? What if you look them in the eye and go, hey, thanks? How many times do you think they're hearing that in a day? One of the things I love that Chris does, and it always starts out a little stressful, is we'll be at a restaurant and we'll have let's say we have really good service. He will say to someone, hey, can I speak to the manager? And I'm always like, oh gosh, I'm sweating. Even though I know where it's going, it's very stressful because everybody gets really panicked when he does this. And the manager will come over and be like, sir, yeah. And he's like, I just want to tell you. And Chris always knows the name of the server. He'll be like, Matt, that's what he's just done an incredible job. It was so good. I just want to say thanks. And they're always like, okay, and they're backing away could that possibly be it? That's how rare it is to get thanked when you work in a service industry. Some of y'all know this. People who are working retail for the next 6 weeks, blessings upon all of you because that is tough. And you never know when somebody's going through a tough time, you never know what rude word or coarse comment is going to push somebody over the edge into having a really terrible day, and what kind word could push someone towards feeling seen and appreciated. Expressing gratitude, that can change the actual world. It can change the community that we live in. So if we can practice gratitude, we start by being thankful to God for the blessings in our lives, for all the things that we have, and then we start to move that out to other people. And if we live this way, if we find common ground in this gratitude, it really is coming from a place of humility. Because it's us saying, you know what? I'm the same as you. I'm a sinner in need of God's grace. I need just as much love and care from God as you do on my best day and on my worst day. And that's how things start to change. I know that this week might be hard. You might be with family members who are not on the same page with you. You may even be with family members who are mean to you. And I'm not saying in any way that we should excuse bad behavior or let ourselves be treated poorly. I hope that you have good and safe and healthy boundaries around you. I really hope you do that. And I'm saying that as we're on this journey of healing from our own wounds, of taking care of ourselves, that we can lead by example. We can make a point to practice gratitude. Because the common ground is that God's image is in every single one of us. And that every person on this earth is worthy of God's love and forgiveness and attention. And I want to pause there and say, when I say those words, when I say the image of God is in every single person on this earth, everybody is worthy of the love and the grace of God. If you are having a hard time not having an exception to that, that's a place we need to pause. We've all been there. The person or the group of people or the situation where we go, no, not them. they've hurt me too much or they've acted too badly. That is where I think God's challenging us this morning. Is to say, if when we say everybody has the image of God, everybody is worthy of God's love, if you can think of a single exception to that list, that is our marching orders for this week. That is the person, that is the group, that is the relationship that we're gonna have to ask God for extra help with. The holy ground that we're standing on today, the common ground, is the one where we're meeting us and God's saying, I wanna make a difference in your life. I wanna make a difference in this world. I'm glad you're standing here with me. And I know that it's not gonna be easy. I know that there's gonna be bumps along this road, but that's why we keep saying practice gratitude, right? Because this is not a given. This doesn't come so naturally to us. Naturally, we're looking inward. Naturally, we're focusing on what we need, who we are. But where God's inviting us is if we want more common ground in this world, if we want more common ground in this church and in our community, around Knoxville, around our country, it's gonna have to start with people like us being willing to step out first and say the common ground that we share is that God made every single person in this room. God loves every single person in this room. Now, we're all on our own journeys. We're all dealing with things in our own way, and we've got various types of sin and mistakes that we need forgiveness for, but that's the common ground. Is that every one of us is in need of the love and grace of Jesus Christ, but the good news is that God has already provided that path for us through the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's where the gratitude begins. We go, God, I need a lot of help, but I also know that every bit of help that I need has already been provided. It's already available to me. So we start there, and we have gratitude to God for the connection that we have in our lives through Jesus, and then we take the faithful and the courageous step out and say, and now I'm gonna be humble enough to share that with other people, to start thanking other people for the contribution they're making to the world, for the contribution they make to my life, for the people that they are. And y'all, that is enough to change the world. That will change your family and will change your Thanksgiving gathering and will change your workplace and the school that you go to and the dorm that you live in. That will start to make a difference. That's our common ground. Our great need for God, and our great need to live in community with each other. Let's pray. God, we're coming on this holiday week, and it can be so full of joy and excitement, but it can also be some of the hardest weeks of the year. And God, we are looking to you today. God, help us to have the courage to put our pride aside, to see each other as human beings and children of God, and just to say thank you. God, we thank you for everything you've given us. And God, we thank you that you don't ask us to walk alone, that you've spent your spirit to be with us, but also that you gave us each other. God, help us not to take that for granted. We love you, God, and we thank you. It's in your son, Jesus' name, we are all praying, and all God's people said, amen.